citizen.
Out of many
We are world citizens, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voice.
Welcome to another episode of the People-Powered Planet, where each week we bring you extraordinary solutionaries and we have discussions and parties and get-togethers on the key issue of how we can solve the crucial problems of the world. There are so many programs that focus on all the deep challenges facing us, all the horrors around. Our focus is on solutions. And I'm the podcast host, Arthur Kanagis. Melanie Bennett is our producer. And today we have a very special guest who is also a podcaster. And he calls himself, you don't call yourself a solutionary, your podcast is called Evolutionary. An evolutionary. Well, that's great. We love to have an evolutionary on. Maybe you, in a moment, you can tell us, well, first tell us what an evolutionary is, and then I'll go ahead and introduce you. What is an evolutionary?
Well, first of all, thank you, Arthur, for having me and inviting me onto the show. I'm deeply honored and humbled to be here. And hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Hawah, and I am definitely attracted to the word evolutionary. It's spelled E-V-E-R is how I spell it. When it first kind of was percolating in my mind, it was really me imagining the space where revolution meets evolution, and how evolution and revolution are both interdependent of each other. And so at first, when the word was something I started using in my vernacular, it was because of my love for the sciences, and then also my love for social justice and social movements and social change, and like how does our evolution as humans connect to our revolution of consciousness and our minds and our emotional and spiritual bodies.
Love that. And I do want to go ahead and give you a full introduction to Hawah Kasat. And Hawah is a celebrated global humanitarian. He's an author, an educator, nonprofit leader. He gave a really intriguing TEDx talk on the outrageous title, "Could Greed Save the World?" What? We'll find out a little more about that as we go on. He is a yoga teacher. He's written 4 books and 4 documentary films. He co-founded Our Common Unity, which is a nonprofit that heals the cycles of trauma through social and emotional literacy, conflict resolution programs. It's worked with over 40,000 families in the Washington, D.C. area. He focused the program on D.C.'s largest school, which I'm very familiar with. It was Wilson, and I attended what was called Western. Western has now become the Duke Ellington School of Performing Arts, and he directed the Peaceable Schools program at Wilson, which also changed its name. What's the new name?
Jackson Reed High School.
Yes. And so, of course, Duke Ellington, actually, some of the most wonderful memories I have were from stage performances and production, and it became an arts-oriented magnet school. But now he's got so many things going for him. He's also was a special representative to the United Nations at the World Conference on Racism. He founded and co-founded Roots to the Sky Sanctuary, 125-acre regenerative farm and healing center in northern Appalachia. Love that area. The film, it's a film that's so fascinating about taking inner city kids out into the wilderness and how that changes their bodies and changes their lives. Something I've certainly experienced in my life as well. He's spoken on everything from BBC, Fox News, NBC, CNN, Al Jazeera. It just goes on, and great work in teaching yoga, peacekeeping, leading work in conflict resolution and nonviolence. So, welcome to our show, Hawah.
Thank you. No, it's great to be here. Appreciate the invitation.
I'll tell you what, when I read all the exciting things you've done and saw the joy and emotion that came through in your yoga, I was also struck by a note of pain that I kind of wanted to start with because it really grabbed me. And you mentioned you were heartbroken by privilege, and you were heartbroken that we haven't yet been able to give birth to a new civilization. And that kind of touched me because I've often felt that heartbreak, and I think we have to move from that heartbreak to the joy. But let's just start out a moment with that heartbreak and tell us a little more about that sense you have. What does it mean? Why are you heartbroken by privilege?
I when I was really young, I was born in the United States, born in New Jersey, a suburban town in New Jersey. And when I was really young, I was able to travel with my family to India over summer breaks and summer vacation between grades. And I traveled to India multiple times through my childhood, through my grade school and then high school. And in India, I was really face to face with what is pretty deep poverty. I got to live with my grandparents who had very little running water or electricity, no refrigerator, cousins that had no shoes on their feet or no third or second pair of clothes to put on. And I I saw the poverty, and it really upended my life. And what really I realized was that being born here in the United States is such a privilege. The privilege of my passport, the privilege of being born in a country where I can travel anywhere in the world because of the virtue of my passport. And so from a young age, I knew that because my cousins would have would have done anything to have been able to travel to the United States. They would have done anything to been able to have the schooling and the education opportunities that I had. And so that's the privilege I refer to. I knew I was born into a middle class home, and I knew even as a middle class United States citizen that I was in a top percentile of those around the world that have access to just all the comforts and all the opportunities. And that was made very clear to me. It was a lot of culture shock. The trips back and forth, they opened my eyes to how lucky and how fortunate I am. And then it created some existential questions in my mind, Arthur. Existential questions around like, why me? Why was I so lucky? Did I do something to be given this gift and this privilege? So that's kind of the privilege I talk about when I say that it's I wish that privilege for everyone.
Well, and I also understood as you were talking about it that and you went into this in the TED Talk that even though you impacted 40,000 people there in Washington D.C. with this Peaceable Schools program you started, uh, in your TED Talk you began to say that uh, you began to feel a pain. You were there. You were getting a standing ovation, and a pain came to you that it wasn't enough. Tell us briefly about why, in the midst of the standing ovation, were you in pain?
Yeah, good question, Arthur. I mean, to start, I just want to clarify for the listeners, nothing I've done in my life and my career has been an independent effort. The impact that we've had on youth and families throughout Washington, D.C., but also the country, that was through a really incredible group of people that all were a part of building what is and what was one common unity. I'm one of the co-founders, and then the Peaceable Schools Initiative at what is now Jackson Reed High School, but was previously Wilson High School, was an initiative that I walked into as one of the first Peaceable School coordinators and directors of that program. But I didn't start that program. I was fortunate enough to have been offered the position and teach at that school for many years under the leadership and the tutelage of one of my mentors, Coleman McCarthy, who's a professor in Washington, D.C. and a Washington Post columnist. So I just want to first just recognize all the great people that came before me and all the people that I've been in partnership with throughout the past 20 plus years in building these programs and initiatives and launching them.
Coleman McCarthy, wow, an old friend. I was so happy to hear that. And Coleman McCarthy was a big advocate for Gary Davis and world citizenship and the thing you were working on. And it's a terrific nonviolent, a terrific force for light in the world. But let me go on to let you go on with about greed.
Absolutely. No, and he's how I learned about the World Service Authority over 25 years ago was through he was my professor in college, and that's how I came across world citizenship, was through his classes. Um, so yeah, the piece around the standing ovation, for me as a nonprofit leader and as somebody that dedicated his life to solving some of the largest crises within our communities through the nonprofit system and mechanism, I I realized that at some point like late in my career, I felt like I really was just set up. I was kind of like bamboozled by the whole system. I spent the best part of my 20s and 30s building a nonprofit organization in a world where nonprofits, in my opinion, are a band-aid to the larger systemic problems, and we often have to fight for the scraps. And when I say scraps, I mean the couch change, the leftover money that a philanthropist might want to donate or a foundation might want to donate to a nonprofit organization. And as a charity, we're being asked to somehow solve some of the biggest problems in the world, or at least our ambition as nonprofit leaders is one of desiring to create solutions and alternatives to the predicament we're in. But frankly, Arthur, it's a scope that is beyond just one sector. And when I say one sector, I mean like I don't believe the nonprofit sector can alone be responsible for helping to solve the housing crisis or dealing with young people that have nowhere to go after school or supporting young people with the social emotional supports they need. All the incredible work nonprofits do is absolutely indispensable, but it's also sometimes a red herring for what's really happening. And so, as a nonprofit leader, I was applauded. I was celebrated for the work I did, for sure. And one day I was up on stage and I'd lost one of my young people to gun violence, and it really hit me. Losing a kid that I'd mentored for over 10 years to gun violence in DC, it shattered me, and it really made me realize that like there's definitely impact that happens. I would never say that the work we did was in vain. I know what we did was critical and is critical, and I would and it and say, and there is a deeper need to solve the underlying root problems. And that requires an interdisciplinary, intersectional approach between sectors where we pull together businesses, corporations, governments, um, the public sector, the private sector. There has to just be more cooperation. We can't expect nonprofits to do this work on our own. And that means that corporations and businesses have to have values and need to be steered and directed by values, just like nonprofits are. And I know it sounds idealistic, but hey, Gary Davis was idealistic, right? So
Yeah, of course.
there's no reason we shouldn't dream big.
Well, absolutely. Dream big. And, one of the things that really resonated with me when I watched your TED Talk was um, you talked about how this feeling of, we put in for, you know, 20, 30 grant applications. We apply, we try, and we struggle to get a few of of the crumbs. And you're feeling that this isn't the way it should work. We need fundamental system change. This is the most important work on the planet, and we're being relegated to uh, to struggling just to stay alive, not even be able to pay our staff to carry on. This is ridiculous, and it kind of shook you up. And you said also that this whole system of uh, uh, the whole system of charity is often creates a dependency and continues, and it's sort of it's not something that solves the problem. An interesting thing, somebody's having a heart attack and heart problems, and you put a Band-Aid on their heart. You imagine, and it's too little and too late for the fundamental problems needed to save our planet, for instance, from ecocide and from the being torn apart by violence. Um, and so, what is your key to how do we do something different? How can we shift from that to a different model?
Uh, It's a great question, Arthur. I mean, I really, first of all, I believe all shift begins within consciousness. I believe it begins from the emotional and the spiritual body. I think that shifts like the ones we need to see on the planet require, as Dr. King would say, a deep revolution of values. And we, for too long, have prioritized competition over cooperation. Um, and in my TED Talk, when I say greed can save the world, the type of greed that I'm talking about when I say greed can save the world is we need to be greedy for kindness. We need to be greedy for compassion. We need to be greedy for cooperation. These are the things that we need to be greedy for. And for me, the work does begin in creating a new culture. So peace building for me begins with culture building. I don't separate peace building from culture building. And I think we are in the situation we're in because we have not stewarded culture in a way through education, through our music, through our arts. We haven't stewarded culture in a way to create the framework and the invitation to choose peace over violence. And violence, as Coleman McCarthy, would say, and also teaches in his work, violence in many ways is a learned behavior, uh, and so is peace building. So, we learn violence. We model what we see out in the world. So I would begin with that, and then I think that it really requires some dismantling of the current structures. It requires some reimagining and some brave, audacious uh, experimentation in ways for us to live in ways that are drastically different than how we live today. And those could be small models. Those could be larger models that are being brought in by leaders of big companies, ways to reimagine capitalistic structures within corporations, ways to reimagine immigration and refugees and global citizenship. I think we need some deep imagination, and then we need to start testing it in smaller ways. We need to start taking nonprofits and encouraging them to be uh, experimenting with revenue models that make them not dependent on just handouts and gifts from donors, but so that they can actually find ways to do the work sustainably in partnership with corporations.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of leadership development, Arthur, I think is required there because we need leaders that champion these values.
Well, I'd be very interested in talking with you further, maybe following this about revenue models that we might use in the work that we're doing, because a lot of the work we're doing has crucial, is some of the crucial new models. You mentioned in your talk, you said, I believe in collective brilliance and new models. I believe in the power of imagination and the birth and birthing new models and new systems of thinking. Well, that's exactly what we're all about, and you mentioned that we need to somehow maybe break down the old systems and come to new. Well, what a time now of firmament of shift of old systems breaking down, of time for new models to emerge. This really is our key time. This is our time to begin to make major breakthroughs and give people a new vision of the kind of world we can move toward and what these new models are. And so I would love if you could comment in our film, The World Is My Country, toward the end. Gary Davis talks about a whole new way that we the people can govern our planet. These old systems of governance, the whole idea. It was the horse and buggy days, as he says, that we had to send a representative off to a different city, and now we see that system of representation putting incredible power in the hands of one person. When really we don't need representatives, we don't need all these politicians and all. We need to invent uh, new breakthrough systems. Gary called it. We called it smart gov. As he and I worked on this, and as we went through his model of synergistic governance, how do we the people directly create these based on Bucky Fuller's model of the geodesic dome, where instead of the top-down organization chart, we're all part of one interactive. Everybody's on top in their area, and you have like what we were talking about in this synergistic governance, and what he talks about in that clip in the film. He talks about uh, that we could create SmartGov. We showed an app, and we're basically a tool where where people could, first of all, there's so many steps to this, but part of it is, if you imagine this Zoom meeting, but you have Zoom of people on opposite sides of political issues, and I'm certainly you dealt with a lot of this in conflict resolution, and then you have certain tools there that allow people, like for instance, an add-on app to Zoom that lets people on opposite sides of issues get the best of conflict resolution training. What is it that's really moving this person? What's their story? The listening, the various aspects of breakthrough. What we do called bully proof in our program, um, and amalgamate that into it's pretty complex, but it's a whole system of people being able to solve problems in their local area with this tool, and interacting with people around the world solving problems, and interacting of these kind of geodesic sphere models of people solving problems in small cells, interacting into a collaboration that brings us into the people-powered planet of the world, that allows us, for example, to pass a global Clean Air Act, and to bring to the top the will of the people. Almost the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. Almost every constitution says that. Well, if we the people create government, why are we stuck in these broken systems and these invisible lines on borders trying to beg and plead our government leaders to change things? Why don't we just go ahead and do it, and create this new global model of bringing to the top, unleashing the superpower, the highest and best wisdom of the people of the planet, amalgamated into the will of the people, where we pass global clean air acts, and then we enforce them by having tools in our phone where we scan products and we don't buy anybody who's a violator, and where when we go for job sites, we have an app that says, oh, this person's a world law violator. We don't apply for jobs. We don't put our banking in there. And these systems will come running to us once we create the will of the people at the global level. We won't have to, as Bucky Fuller said, we don't have to fight the old system. We just create something new that brings everybody to it. Do you remember seeing that part of the film? You watched it years ago, but
I did. I mean, first of all, thank you for saying all that. And I'd first like to start by saying that I actually think what you're talking about is actually not so new. For thousands of years, we've seen indigenous people around the planet live in harmony with each other and the land. We have models that exist, of very incredibly resilient human civilizations that were living in harmony with the earth, and not based in economies of extraction and pillaging and taking. Uh, the the advent of the extractive mindset of destroying and of profiting at all costs, um, is a very self-centered one, and one which is somewhat new to our time, right? We can see where this kind of starts to take hold 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and there is a time before that we must remember too, that existed, right? That there's a time when we've seen uh, civilizations of people and indigenous wisdom guide guide matriarchal societies of people as well, right? Where there's not this patriarchy that's driving um, the entire leadership of tribes or local towns or villages. Um, and those models are one that we should cherish and remember and realize that we actually have that capacity and that capability wired within us. I think that's really important to me. The second piece that I think is really critical in this sort of unraveling of the mystery is really realizing that we've lost a lot of our way recently, but I don't see this time, and this is just my take. I don't see this time as more important or pivotal in the span of geological history as a time 500 years ago or 50 years ago or 5,000 years ago or 10 million years ago even. I think there's a lot of language that we have within our culture, within people. There's a lot of fear right now, a lot of anxiety, like, oh, these are the end times, and this is the most important time in human civilization. And if we don't do it now, then, we've missed the moment. Um, I personally just don't subscribe to that because I actually see every time as equally valuable and equally important within the historical framework of the budding human species, but beyond the human species. I think in many ways we have trapped ourselves in thinking that the human species is the most important species or valuable species on the planet. So that frame for me, what it does is it once again creates a human-centered frame to life and existence. And I actually think part of the work right now is to move humans away from the center and to allow us to realize once again that we are a part of something, right? I think right now we are driven by this idea that we like the world revolves around humans, right? Just like a long time ago, humans believed that the sun revolved around the earth. And I think that is a piece of the consciousness that we have to shift. We have to once again come back to old indigenous wisdom, even right here on Turtle Island, tribes like the Lakota and the Cherokee, seeing ourselves as a part of the circle of life, not as the dominating apex predator of the circle of life, but it's a giving and a receiving, and we've lost the giving. And all we do is try to receive and take and take and take. And so those are two things that are really critical in my framing for the moment we live in. I don't think that this is just the most important time we live in. I think it's an important time we live in. And I do think there are things we should be doing actively, but I don't think those things are separated from what should be the habit of what is the cadence and the rhythm for how we move with the world. And we've just forgotten our connection to the earth.
Yes.
And we've lost that relationship. And because we've lost the relationship, we don't honor the earth. And because we don't honor the earth and the rainforests and the coral reefs, we don't honor each other. And how do you denationalize or how do you create transparent open borders when we make everything divided by a river and we have
Mhm.
people owning rivers or the way that we've taken land and again back to indigenous wisdom,
Yes.
earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth. Like the whole idea of nation states is again like claiming ownership on something instead of stewardship, and I think it's about
Right.
stewardship and not ownership.
Wow, I love that, and I think the key is that when we look back to previous societies, is that human civilization grew out of partnership. It was out of partnership between male and female, and between all the different sides that we actually began to exist, and why we could compete with the other animals who were bigger, stronger, and had bigger teeth. We could do it because we moved into partnership. Partnership is the key. We had Rayon Eisler on our podcast, and she was a key person talking about that, but also partnering with like the founding mothers movement and moving toward other ways of trying to create partnership. But now, one of the key things you mentioned is getting connected to nature. And in your documentary, you took uh, kids from the inner city who never left that sense of fear and watching over your shoulder, and you took them out to the wilderness. Tell us a little briefly about how that impacted lives and how that's part of your transformation experience.
Absolutely. I mean, thank you for that question. And it's a perfect bridge, actually, because a lot of the impetus for that program was to rebuild that lost connection to nature and the earth. And the documentary was called Fly By Light. And Fly By Light was one of the youth programs of One Common Unity. And in the Fly By Light program, uh, the the one of the main objectives was helping young people come back into healing with the natural world and themselves. And we did that through rites of passage work in nature, where we would bring inner city youth into nature for these week-long retreats that incorporated dialogue, discussion around social justice, helping young people process trauma, learn about domestic violence, learn about the skills they need, the deep breathing, the mindfulness skills they need to really go back into their communities and be leaders. Um, so the Fly by Light program was developed around that model of how do we restore the connection with the natural world, because those that live in a city, and especially those who may not have the mobility which is granted to us through class and financial stability, oftentimes grow up within the same 20 blocks their whole lives, and rarely get a chance to get on a plane. I mean, again, back to the privilege of travel, right, Arthur? There's a
Mm.
deep privilege that I had when I could get on a plane and travel to India. And as I was a 7-year-old kid in India, what a deep privilege I had to be in Mumbai, to be in Bombay, riding on a train and seeing a whole nother universe that was unbeknownst to me when I was living in New Jersey. And then coming back with these fresh set of eyes and seeing how big the world is and how different people around the world live. That's the kind of experience that we're instilling and trying to provide young people in inner cities when we bring them on these retreats.
Mhm.
Roots to Sky Sanctuary is my new project. Fly by Light was the documentary film in the
Right.
old youth program. Roots to Sky Sanctuary is a project I launched in 2020 with a few friends. And we have a 125-acre regenerative farm and healing arts center that we're stewarding and creating out in West Virginia and the border of Maryland, so in Appalachia, about 3 hours from DC.
Hmm. Well, so uh, tell me though, going back to this program in the DC schools, tell me a little bit more about how you brought conflict resolution training and work into dealing with kids on maybe opposite gangs or opposite cultures or other people who had divisions and strife. How did you use the power of nonviolence to bring them together across the divides?
I love that. And the program was absolutely rooted within the power of nonviolence and social emotional learning. And for me, the pedagogy was about the arts and music as the bridge. So the way that we got young people interested and intrigued and excited about coming to our programs was offering spaces for creative expression. We had a lot of poetry, a lot of music, a lot of songwriting, opportunities to work with incredible musicians and artists. And in that way, we were able to drop in with the youth on a cultural level, right? I think oftentimes conflict resolution programs can come into a space and they're very heady, very academic focused. And I think if you really want to reach young people where they are, you've got to be willing and able to speak their language and really frame the conflict resolution and the restorative justice programs within a language that they relate to and that they speak, and that was bringing in modern day hip hop and looking at what's happening in current events and in society and using pop culture as the medium to teach about alternatives to violence and alternative ways to live and lifestyles. And really just creating space for dialogue too, Arthur. I think a big part of my work as an educator continues to be how do we decentralize power in a classroom, right? Very often, the teacher-student relationship is very hierarchical. The frame of that is one where the teacher has power over the student, and there becomes this sort of idea that the teacher knows something that the student doesn't. And I think part of like the work of dismantling and reimagining these systems is creating spaces where the student feels also like they're offering and giving
Mm,
something really valuable, because I think that's what
mm.
learning is. Learning is about the humility, even as an educator, having the humility to know that I have something to learn from this person. It's not just a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And I think that's the magic of education, is we can create these transformational spaces if we're willing to step back and allow the young person to also take the lead. And that means even democratizing what we learn. I
Right,
would I would spend time in the beginning developing my class syllabus with my students. I would spend time asking my students, what do you want to learn about? I had my own ideas, but what are the ideas that are most important to you?
right,
What's relevant to you? And let's vote on some things that we'll do sessions on and integrate into the curriculum. So I was able to do that because I was working in a time where I was teaching an elective called Alternatives to Violence. And then also one common unity, we had youth programs after school and during the summertime where we had free reign over our curriculum. So developing curriculum with the young people as active participants, it makes it something they can also own. And it
right.
makes it much more exciting to them.
Wow, well, that is so close to my own heart and the work that we're doing because I think you're so right. You could preach you ought to respect each other or you ought to listen to each other, whatever, and it goes in one ear and out the other. But you put it in form of music and drama and the language of young people. It has a huge impact. Let's turn to the questions.
Hawah, I just want to say, oh my gosh, you are wise. You are so wise. You have so much to teach, and it's so wonderful to have you here. My goodness, and just the word bamboozle that woke me up too. Yeah, why is this system like this, where all the good things that we want to happen in the world, in other words, flourishing, lots of respect, people getting to do what their calling is, here, just being purposeful and then enjoying life here as well. But that was such an interesting perspective because you're just so ingrained that, oh yeah, I'm last because I'm a nonprofit. So
Right.
that's beautiful. That was very powerful for me.
And we're also told, Melanie, that that's how if we want to change the world, if we want to like make the world a better place, that's how we do it. We do it through becoming a nonprofit employee or starting a nonprofit organization. That was the advice I got from my mentors was, well, start a nonprofit if you want to change the world.
Mm,
And I'm like, well, can we change that? Because that feels like part of the bamboozling.
yeah, it's
Why why don't I think about there's other like great ways to also change the world, and
Yeah.
just
Yeah, it's
explore
it's the
that.
it's the I think you finished, sorry. Um it's like you're okay, the same thing you're taught as a mother. I'm not a mother, but your mother, a parent, you want to just sacrifice and sacrifice and give. And there are a lot of stay-at-home moms with no rights because they don't have any income source except kind of begging from their husband, which all the women who were raising children should have been the highest paid people. It's our, if we're going to keep the money thing going on. So anyway, oh my gosh,
Oh, absolutely. I would talk about that all day with you. I mean, it's so true. And it's one of the reasons why we have so much burnout within the nonprofit sector, right? I mean, the burnout it's a symptom of us trying to do too much and not having the boundaries,
hmm,
creating the boundaries we need to know to how to do this work sustainably for the long haul. And instead, you have all these young leaders that are so motivated and so inspired. And by the time they hit their 30s, they've got no gas left in the tank and they just throw their hands up and they give up. And they're like, well, forget this. I'm going to go figure out another way to live. And become, and pursue another career because they become deflated by what happens in the nonprofit sector. So we lose a lot of young leadership. We lose activism by the burnout, and we need to solve for that now because we are losing generations of leaders because of our inability to reform and reimagine the whole sector.
Exactly. And for our first question, let's go to Amar. Amar, go right ahead.
I didn't hear anything about how to involve from the presentation of AVAC handicapped people, people with a disease that can be physical but mental disease. And this is the biggest problem to solve and to have a real inclusion and to be really the world citizen all together. And this is very difficult, mainly for normal children or normal people. The young people or adults with handicap try to be involved, are the ones which generally make a step back. So how do you manage? Thank you.
Amar, let me just rephrase that. So Hawah, Amar would like to ask you about people who are having mental difficulties or they're handicapped. How can they be participants in doing what you were talking about, systemic change? Yes, that's it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it really begins in our homes. It begins within our families. Systemic change, I think it's like baking a cake. It's best to have a convection oven if you want to get to the inside of the cake. So you need heat from the bottom, you need heat from the top, and I think it's really important to remember that. I think there's a lot of space and need for the perspectives and the ideas of those who are differently abled. And I think in many ways they offer the greatest insight to where we need to go, because creating an inclusive world where everyone belongs and everyone has a place and has value and worth requires us all to think about the ways and the needs that all people have, whether that's because of a physical difference, whether that's because of a mental or emotional need or divergence that needs to be addressed, whether that's because of the color of someone's skin or their gender or their sexuality or their religion. So I think the question is an important one. I think the advocacy from those in all of these marginalized groups is critical for building that new world. And most importantly, I think it's about us working across intersections and really leaning into the intersectionality and seeing how many of the issues that someone who might consider themselves, uh, mentally or emotionally or physically in a different place than what is considered the status quo, it's for them to also see how their struggles are connected to the struggles of those people who might be born in poverty or born in a religious group that is typically marginalized, and then connecting those movements, connecting those struggles together into one effort.
Let's go to Stefan. Stefan, with your question or comment.
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit of both. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think we've got agreement in the fact that we have to change the system. But I do have a few things I'd like to raise. First of all, I am very much a socialist. I have trouble seeing how we can change the system under capitalism enough. So I think, and I think that we're in the kind of end stage capitalism myself. I think we see a lot of signs of that. But in particular, if we could get those values within the capitalist system, and they are there, and they are there in individual people. However, I think what we're seeing is that the structure of capitalism does not allow for the people with those values to have the power to make the changes. And in particular, I'd like to talk about corporations, because you mentioned about corporations. It would be great if we could have those values within corporations. And yes, we do have what do they call it? Corporate responsibility and all of that sort of stuff. But there's a Canadian movie. I'm from Canada, by the way. But there's a Canadian movie called The Corporation. I don't know if you saw it. It was around 2000, I think it came out, something like that. And a few years ago, they came out with The Corporation, The Unfortunate Necessary sequel, because so little has changed. One of the best values that humans have, if you will, I would say, is empathy. And the trouble with the structure of a corporation is that we are not empathetic. We don't see the other parts of that structure. So you have the workforce in one place, you have the executive in another place, you have the owners in another place, and you have the consumers in another place. And they do not, because of the nature, the very structure of a corporation, it does not allow for empathy. So that was one thing that I'd like. So if you can comment on that. The other thing too about this, whether it is or isn't a particularly crucial time in our existence as a species and for the planet, uh, because this has been called the Anthropocene. And although I agree that we have to definitely get by that, and I think that drawing the analogy between thinking that the Earth is the center of the universe, and thinking that we are the center of Earth, I think that's a very good analogy to draw. However, we are at a critical point in that the existence of the species, the continuation of the species, and a lot of other species on Earth are at very great risk. The Earth will survive, but we're doing a lot of damage. So I think on the one hand, I agree with you. We have to get past ourselves, who we think we are. And I think referring to indigenous societies and those values is very appropriate. But I think we have to recognize that this is a critical juncture in something that I don't think we have faced before, the extinction of the species. And then thirdly, I wanted to talk, I'm a retired teacher. And on the one hand, I agree, and I think that there's been a shift within education to recognize what it is that students bring to a classroom and to study. But at the same time, if a teacher doesn't have anything to teach, they're called a teacher because they do have something. One of the things as a teacher, as I'm sure you know, you learn so much from your students as long as you are open to it. So I guess I'd say that going back to indigenous culture, one of the things is the elders and the knowledge keepers. And as teachers, I think that, and as elders, I think in some ways we're up against a problem because we have abdicated our responsibility in our society of being adults, recognizing that we do have something, that we have lived through things, that we have learned things, that we can share with younger people as they can share with us. So I'm just a little bit concerned about, the old throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's something to that teacher-student relationship that is, I'd call it sacred. And I think that we have sort of, what would you say, abdicated our responsibility as teachers by not including our students to the degree that we should. But we should also recognize our place in that relationship. So those are a few comments, and I'd be interested in your comments about that.
No, thank you for the feedback, Stephen. It's great. They're great comments. I feel very much in alignment with what you said. I mean, first of all, empathy to begin with is literally, I think, the lifeline for us right now. It's like developing empathy, creating empathy, and having empathy is one of the missing ingredients for building global peace. Number two, I just want to clarify. I never said that this was not an important moment. I just said this is one of many important moments, and I consider all moments equally important. And I hear what you're saying. I think there's a space for what you said. I think my frame is really to help us also kind of understand like so much of what we do is all centered around humans. And again, you spoke about the human species becoming extinct, but I do want to name that the Anthropocene, the sixth mass extinction, is the sixth one of five that we know about on a planet that's been around for over 3 billion years. We only know of five mass extinctions. There's probably been more than that. And I guess what I'm saying is there's been species that have gone extinct over and over again. And I still think there's a human-centric speciesist view. I'm not saying this isn't an important moment. This is a very important moment, but I'm just not going to make the value judgment to say this moment in human history perhaps, but not in global history, in planetary history. I just don't think it's more important than a moment that happened 5 million years ago that we have no knowledge of. I think it's perhaps two different things we're talking about, but I couldn't agree more. Like there needs to be urgency, first of all. I'm not saying don't have urgency. Mother Teresa, Dr. King, Nelson Mandela, all of our great leaders, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, we've been driven by a sense of urgency. And we should have a sense of urgency, but we also have to be rooted in a sense of space and time and understanding and wisdom. And I think that wisdom is a wisdom that helps us dismantle this speciesist idea that the whole earth revolves around us. Humans may go extinct. It might not happen now. It might happen 500 years from now. It might happen 5 million years from now. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's very plausible. 99% of all species go extinct as per the science. That's 99%. So sooner or later, we're going to go extinct unless we hit that 1% mark. And so all I'm saying is like, it's an important moment, but let's also have the wisdom to like zoom out enough to understand that like what we do now is critical, but what we did 500 years ago was critical. And if we discount the way the past influences the present, we lose the connection of understanding why this moment is critical. Because what we did 500 years ago was equally critical, because it's what got us here in this moment. At least that's just my opinion. And then third part of what you said about teachers, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I'm speaking from a place of like overcompensating. I deeply value that sacred relationship you spoke about. I do think there's a deep, important space for having somebody be a guide. This is why we have the Fly by Light program. This is why rites of passage work and elders exist within societies and cultures. Absolutely. And I think there's a way to approach the modern day student with more of a like participatory framework, which will help us engage in the culture we live in. Because young people aren't really interested, at least to me, it seems, in having like a teacher dictator up there anymore, like it used to be, where there's like such a power imbalance. So I think it's just like, how do we find the sweet spot between what you're saying and what I said earlier? Because I do think, yeah, of course, a teacher has to hold space. That's our role. We have to hold space and create space for learning. And there's different ways to do that. But I deeply, deeply appreciate what you said. I really love your insight on it.
And I love this exchange. Wow. I see we're at 11:02. So I'm going to ask Hawah, do you have time for a couple more questions or no?
Sure, let's go.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I got time for one more question.
One more question. I
yeah.
told Bud if he wanted to, I already asked Bud if he wanted to jump in. Bud, go ahead. You'll be the last question.
Hawah, thank you so much for being our twin brother from different mothers. I think you qualify for that for most every one of us on this call. I just want to bow to your skillful oratory and articulation of the challenges that we're facing. I don't really have an answer to how greed necessarily is going to save us. I didn't hear enough of that part of your how this whole talk was framed, but I do want to raise the question that you just mentioned, that it's a healthy, important need to have a sense of urgency. And I would ask all of us to really take a serious look at what is happening in our government right now, every minute of every day. And I was on a call earlier this morning with the Center for Purposeful Leadership out of Minnesota, and we have an Inner Circle for the Future group. And one of the fellows in our group was a 25, 30-year public servant in the federal government. And he just received this morning a memo from the Office of Personnel Management in Washington, D.C. that was forwarded to him by one of his current colleagues who is still employed by the federal government. And I put the memo, a link to it, in the chat. And it's a direct part of Hitler's playbook for fascism, because this was a memo that was sent out today to every federal employee telling them that they have 10 days to report on the behavior and activities of everyone else in the federal government. And if they don't report anything that has to do with anything going sideways with Trump's agenda and the Project 2025, the America First Policy Institute, and all these outrageous illegal orders from their playbook, we're in serious trouble. And I don't want to be too hyperbolic about this, because I know that it goes against Arthur's nature and all of our natures to be totally optimistic, totally positive all the time. It's beautiful and wonderful, which I agree. And I put another link in there because I share with you the value of going deep into nature. I've been a guide for Sacred Passage in the Way of Nature for 35 years, doing deep immersion. In fact, the first one was in Lost Hollow, West Virginia, that I guided. But we have a 350-acre sanctuary, sacred land sanctuary in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in Colorado. So please, let's connect and continue this conversation, and tell me because there's greed, ideological greed, and the current crew of the sycophants in Washington, D.C., that Trump is putting into power to destroy our current government system, have an ideological greed to force on all of us their white Christian nationalist racist agenda. So I'm just curious how we can be fierce warriors for the human spirit with all the qualities of love, generosity, kindness, etc., empathy, compassion, and still get through this gauntlet.
Yeah. Thank you, Bud. I mean, to answer the first part of your thought around the title, How Greed Could Save the World, I think it's a little bit of just it's a little bit of language gymnastics. It's meant to create some intrigue and to provide a little bit of space of nuanced reflection on the ways greed have, in many ways, brought us to this moment in human history, right? For me, the idea of being greedy for compassion, being greedy for generosity, being greedy for kindness or empathy, these are the types of ways that we need to cultivate our direction. We need to be greedy for things that typically we don't associate with the word greed. And so I'm just really offering an opportunity for people to reimagine the word and reimagine our values in that. But I do appreciate your thoughts around that. It's complicated, you know. But I also think that greed also has to be larger than just what sometimes can be like, you know, invaluable, which is like helping a group of kids at a school, which is invaluable and absolutely essential and needed. But then how do we be greedy for system-wide change? How do we be greedy for like, how are we not just satisfied and content with keeping a group of young people out of the criminal justice system? How do we become greedy for changing the entire criminal justice system? Like it's kind of ambition around like that. I think that's where I'm kind of leaning into. So yeah, I think that's where I was was imagining the greed playing into our thoughts.
Yeah, that's great. I love that, the way that gets turned around. I wanted, because there's so many educators in this group, I wanted to also encourage us to see if our local school districts are engaged with the Junior Great Books program, which I think is still a viable and a valuable opportunity with it, but it requires the support probably of the federal government, and that's about to disappear. However, the wealthier school districts can do it, and then somehow maybe we can outreach. But the Junior Great Books program gave short stories for middle school kids. I was a volunteer parent, and each short story presents a moral dilemma, and the kids are challenged to defend their decision about how to deal with the moral dilemma that's embedded in the short story. And the first thing we do is we go into a classroom and we turn it into a circle. And just that alone is a profound shift for most people, most students that are subjected to the pedantic model of the wisdom keeper in the front of the room, and they're all supposed to be sponges. So it's called the Junior Great Books program. And I think they probably update the short stories on a regular basis so they're relevant to current issues in young people's minds and hearts. And it gives them an opportunity to discern right from wrong and then support their positioning by citing evidence from the stories they read. So it's a completely, it shifts the whole way that we are teaching quite profoundly. So anyway, I wanted to make that as, offer that as another resource.
My goodness, this is, there's so much, but I know Hawah has to go. Hawah, did you have a few seconds to add about how to stop the Nazi movement here in the United States?
Yeah, small question.
Yeah. Not right now. I don't. But I do. Sorry. I do. I do hope to stay in touch with everyone. I would love to continue these conversations in new spaces and enjoy the dialogue. I think dialogue is also one of the most important things that are missing right now in our culture and society. So maybe the answer to your question, Melanie, is more healthy dialogue, more opportunity to see beyond the black and the white and to see the humanity that each of us has and holds. I think that seeing of humanity and inviting active listening and compassionate communication is the way to do it.
Wow.
So, and I'd love to invite people to tune into my podcast, which I dropped a link there, but you can find my podcast, Evolutionary, on Spotify or Apple or anywhere podcasts are found.
Yes.
And I'm also teaching around the country. So if anybody wants to go to my website, you can find my retreats. I lead retreats, and would love to stay in touch.
Oh my gosh, you're incredible. You're incredible. So I just want to pass it over to Arthur real quick to close, and I'll let you go. So there's so much, and I thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. So appreciate you. So Arthur, go right ahead.
Yes, well, this was terrific. We really enjoyed listening to you, and we agree. Let's continue these dialogues. You did a fantastic job of interviewing David on your podcast, and let's continue these dialogues. I'll email you some further information, and let's see how we can build. How we can build together the kind of systematic change and deep system change that is needed in our world today. So thanks for being a creative thinker and an evolutionary. Join us each week and every week on the People Powered Planet podcast. Just go to the worldismycountry.com/club and please do join. We're here. We are in that situation of begging for pennies, and Hawah has reminded us to move to a revenue model, and there is an opportunity for a revenue model. You can, if you click on the thing, just simply join. Only $10 a month. You can be a official part of the club, and you get extra chances to to connect with key solution areas. So please do make sure you're on the mailing list and join us each week and every week on the People Powered Planet podcast.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video.